Good evening, dear colleagues. The United Arab Emirates and China called for this meeting to express grave concern at the continued attacks by Israel on hospitals, refugee camps, schools, UN premises, places of worship, and other civilian facilities in the Gaza Strip, including most recently on the Jabalia and Kazi refugee camps, hura school, and the Dar shifa hospital in Gaza City. As the Secretary General stated this morning, this is a crisis of humanity. In less than a month, more than 10,000 Palestinians in the Gaza Strip have been killed. And as we speak, Palestinian civilians continue to be killed. Children are bearing the brunt. As several UN officials have stated already, Gaza is becoming a graveyard for children. No one is safe more. No one is safe. More UN aid workers and journalists have been killed in 4 weeks than in any month of a conflict in decades. If ever, Palestinian civilians are also deprived of necessities essential to their survival. In the midst of this catastrophic situation, we emphasize the need for the Security Council to act with urgency and adopt a meaningful and actionable resolution. Over the past couple of weeks, members of the Security Council have been working tirelessly to this end. We call for an urgent humanitarian ceasefire. The Secretary General just made the same call this morning, a humanitarian ceasefire now. This is desperately needed to enable full, rapid, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access, including for UN and humanitarian personnel, consistent with international humanitarian law. We urge all parties to take steps urgently towards a cessation of hostilities to ensure the protection of civilians. We demand that the parties to the conflict facilitate the continuous, sufficient, and unhindered provision of essential goods and services to all civilians throughout the Gaza Strip. These must include electricity, water, fuel, food, and medical supplies sustained and at scale. Ambassador Nusseibeh will continue.
As we heard today in our briefings, civilians in Gaza cannot even find safety in UN facilities, schools, hospitals, and refugee camps. These civilian facilities have been under attack in violation of international law. It is imperative that their protective status is upheld. We condemn all violations of international humanitarian law, all violence against civilians, including all acts of terrorism and indiscriminate attacks. We condemn the 7th October attacks by Hamas on Israel. We also condemn the indiscriminate attacks by Israel on the Gaza Strip. We express our grave concern at the continued detention of hostages and demand the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, as well as their safety, well-being, and humane treatment consistent with international law. But the killing and maiming of children, attacks on schools and hospitals in the Gaza Strip, and denying children access to humanitarian assistance are all very grave violations against children. We call on all parties to fully comply with their obligations under international humanitarian law, including the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure. We reiterate the need for the parties to take measures to ensure the safety and well-being of civilians and their protection, as well as humanitarian and medical personnel, UN personnel, and journalists. Wars have rules, and they must be upheld. Thank you.
Can you give us an update on the draft resolution and where that might be at, whether you're progressing towards a vote?
The discussions are ongoing. The full 15 members of the Council are fully engaged on the draft text, and we will continue trying to narrow the gaps that still exist between Council members on this issue.
Ambassador, can we have a clarification?
What are the gaps?
Look, I think the gaps remain on what is achievable on the ground, where the political appetite is amongst some of the major players on this file, and the crisis on the ground as well. I think the most pressing need on the ground, which all Council members have recognized, is the urgent humanitarian need. But I think the bigger problem, which also many Council members have recognized, is that without a cessation of hostilities or some kind of humanitarian truce that is immediately implemented, far too many civilians have already lost their lives, and far too many more will continue to lose their lives unless that is put into place. But those are some of the parameters of where the gaps in the discussion exist, and I think the conversations are ongoing to try and have impact on the ground.
So it looks like at the Security Council, you don't even agree on the number of casualties. The French ambassador just came here and talked about 7,000 people dead. You say over 10,000. Do you agree on the number?
The number we're using is from UN official briefings. So we'll leave it at that. I don't mean to be morbid, but there are a number of innocent lives under the rubble today, so until everybody is accounted for, we actually don't have a sense of the full scale, but the numbers so far are the ones that the UN are giving us, and I think we can all rely on those numbers.
Ambassador, can humanitarian aid, food, water, any medicine, can it be administered and given to the people of Gaza in a safe and secure and efficient way while there's still fighting going on? And the humanitarian pause, does it mean that you feed them in one hand and a few hours after the cessation of hostilities for whatever hours, you bomb them again? I mean, does that make sense to anybody?
Yeah. No, thank you for the question. I think you're all expressing some of the frustration that Council members express daily in our discussions and deliberations. The number of trucks going in are very clearly not at the scale required. They're not even at the scale that existed prior to the war on Gaza, so clearly insufficient, and in particular with the ongoing hostilities, even less sufficient than they were before. This is a requirement of international humanitarian law, and we are all committed to doing what we can with partners on the ground. Egypt has played a very important role on this, but also with other partners on the ground, with Israel in the Gaza Strip, as well as with partners from around the world who have contributed to the devastating humanitarian situation to try and scale up at the scale that the UN has itself asked for, and that is quite a large scale up that needs to happen. I mean, just today in my national capacity, I'll mention that the UAE president has launched an emergency field hospital that will be set up in Gaza. 5 aircraft have left Abu Dhabi airport this morning and will be arriving in the Al Arish airstrip shortly, and we will try and set up an emergency field hospital in Gaza, crossing through the correct borders. We've also announced that we will be taking 1,000 Palestinian children who require medical treatment along with their families to come and rehabilitate in the UAE. So we are working on all of these fronts to try and help people who have just seen far too much suffering already.
When you say Gaza, is that with Israel agreement, or do you mean in Egyptian borders near Rafah?
I will share all of the details in the coming day or two. This is being operated from headquarters.
Will both UAE and China be at the Thursday meeting in Paris? Will there be a representative?
We are sending a minister to that meeting, the Paris meeting. Yeah.
At this moment, I don't have further information on that. What I can tell is that I fully agree with what Ambassador Nusaibeh has shared with us on in our national capacity. We have made our position known. And meanwhile, as the presidency of the Security Council, what I can tell is that I will continue to take the current situation in Gaza as the top priority of the Security Council. And that's, I'm sure, is also your request. And we will do whatever your concerns are our concerns, and we will do whatever we can to realize the ceasefire, to protect more civilians, to avoid further humanitarian catastrophe and also to prevent further spillover to the neighboring region. That's very much important for the peace and security for the whole region. So we will do whatever we can along the right direction. That might be challenging, that might be difficult, and that's why this Middle East issue has been there for so long, but we will never give up.
When's the next council meeting or consultation?
There will be a council briefing, I believe, on Thursday, but under the Chinese presidency, we intend to call for regular briefings, meetings, formal and informal, to keep the spotlight on this very, very critical humanitarian catastrophe that is unfolding on the Gaza Strip. And thank you for your support. Thank you.
One quick question for Irish TV. People outside this building, ordinary people, cannot understand why you can't reach agreement. You're diplomats. It's literally your job. Why can't you reach agreement when 420 children a day are dying or being injured?
I think that's a fair question. I think the Council feels enormous pressure to reach agreement on how to help and impact the dire situation on the ground. The General Assembly has met and spoken. 121 countries did reach agreement. So there is clearly an emerging consensus of what needs to happen next. But the Security Council is being looked to operationalize our impact on the ground and to save lives. So today the priority is saving lives, particularly the 4,000 children that have been reported killed already in this conflict. And I think that's what's motivating council members to meet regularly and try and find agreement on the next steps forward. So we are working night and day, and of course there have been a number of diplomatic efforts in parallel in the region. You will have seen the US Secretary of State is in the region. You will have seen a number of other foreign ministers and heads of state heading to the region. I think all eyes are on trying to ameliorate this situation and to prevent wider regional spillover. We are working night and day on it. Too many people have lost their lives, including far too many humanitarian workers and UN workers. The number's almost up to 90 now in a very short space of time. It is tragic, but we are working round the clock to try and do what we can.
When do you have an agreement?
We're working hard to try and find that agreement, and we're working on numerous levels, including diplomatic levels in capitals. Thank you.
Thank you.